most of the researchers who worked out the geologic column were Christians who had always accepted the Genesis account of creation as simple fact. Their reaction to the geological findings was generally something like, I guess I must have misinterpreted the Bible. They didn't abandon their Christian faith, and they certainly didn't try to explain away the geological evidence. It's only modern anti-evolutionists who claim you have to do one or the other. By the time Charles Lyell came along in the early 19th century, the geologic column was well established and being constantly refined and filled in by new investigations. Lyell's contributions are mostly doing a lot of field work and writing a good book about stratigraphy. His book, Principles of Geology, went through 11 editions in his lifetime. He also promoted the idea that natural processes were the same in the past as in the present. That's uniformitarianism, which Lyell also did not invent.
2 minutes.
Thank you. And Lyell was not an evolutionist. Only in the last edition did he finally come around to saying that species might arise naturally from older species. He wasn't really a lawyer either. He was admitted to the bar. His daddy made him take the law, but he had devoted his whole life to geology. I just want to touch one more thing. The parody of hominid evolution in Mike's brochure illustration deserves comment. First, it shows a gibbon as, quote, ancestral primate. This is like saying my cousin is my great-great-grandmother. Then it dismisses Homo habilis as a combination of at least 2 species. Well, even if the classification of the habilis specimens is finally changed, and it's always under dispute like any other classification, they're still fossil hominids. Next, it dismisses Homo erectus as a giant gibbon skull and a human femur. In fact, fossils from dozens of individuals of this species have been found and no giant gibbons involved. And Neanderthals are dismissed as an old man with arthritis. I do know how that legend got started. One of the early Neanderthal finds did show symptoms of arthritis. But there are known fossils of over 100 individual Neanderthals, including about 80 almost complete skeletons, all ages, sexes, degrees of health or disease. And we have, luckily, enough Neanderthal DNA remaining to indicate that they were a distinct species, although closely related to modern humans. And am I out of time?
Yeah, 1 second.
I donate my 1 second.
Works, some contrast between that and religious techniques of reasoning. I'm working at present on a very unusual project. It's called Conditional Theology, Remaking Religion. And I have a number of rather trenchant essays that I've put into that. If anybody's interested, I can talk about that later in the progress of that. I think it would be a good idea to talk briefly about speciation. There's a lot of misunderstanding about this concept, and especially the idea that when the first member of a species comes along, it has to find a mate to match itself. This is a very simple model that I'm going to use to illustrate speciation. Nothing in life is this simple, but this gets the concepts across, I think. I started with generation 1 here, and I've given it a genome of 1,000. The genome in this kind of model is just a number. That's all there is to it. In the next generation, I've forced a mutation here. The genome changes in one direction or the other by 1. It either goes to 999 or goes to 1,001. For the sake of having a quality that could be selected by natural selection, I've said the genome will correlate to the length of fur of some furry critter. So larger number, longer fur, shorter number, shorter fur. Okay, then I have made it be, in this simple model, that anything that's within 4 of each other, that's genetically similar enough that it's capable of mating. Anything that's 5 apart from each other Now you're getting either out to the end of the limits of a species, questionable mating possibilities, and I've dictated in this model that something that's 5 apart, like 997 and 1002 here, that could mate and it would produce an infertile hybrid. So that's analogous to what happens in real life, only obviously much simpler. Now then, let's see what happens over a period of time here. I've shown here the extremes. These are all the decreasing genomes or the shorter furs. These are the increasing genomes or the longer furs. Well, in whatever their environment is, the longer furred creatures are going to probably tend to go towards where it's colder because they'll do better in a colder environment. The shorter furred animals will drift toward wherever it's warmer. And that will set up a gradient in here in which they're spread across the environment. If situation arises later where they are actually divided by something, it could be a mountain range, it could be being on 2 different islands, it could be isthmus of land in between 2 bodies of water, or just simple distance. These lines then become farther and farther apart as they become isolated. Now let's just take this side that goes down here, down the right. This genome keeps changing, but I make a window here. This first group of 5 down here, they're all within 4 of each other. That's still a species. They can breed with each other. Next set of generation, those are all within 4 of each other. That could be a species still, would still be classified as a species. So would this, and so would this. But now then, what happens if, I'm imagining now that all of these generations could be living at once, but suppose this group got wiped out here, or this many. These couldn't breed with those, so you'd now have 2 different species. Same thing happens if I go down either side here. I can go like this. Here's the 1st generation, 2nd generation, 3rd generation, 4th generation, 5th generation. If I take this all as one chain here, that might look like an extended species or a chain-wise species or maybe a species with subvarieties or something like that, because this one could breed with that one, or this one could breed with that one, maybe this one could breed with that one. But now then, suppose all these ancestors die out. Now what have I got down here? I've got 997 and 1003, and they can't breed because their genomes are too far apart. Now then, when all of these guys died out, everybody that's in this group and this group instantly became a separate species, because now you have 2 populations that are split apart and they can't interbreed. There is no such thing as a first individual of a new species. This is a problem that happens over populations that drift apart far enough so that eventually their ancestors would no longer be able to breed with each other. And then you have a new species here. And then as you go on down here, I've highlighted here in this red line, that's obviously a different group from this line over here, which is this group. So now you have a species created that way. And that, I think, gets it in its simplest form of what speciation and descent is like. Obviously, the situation is much more complicated in real life history. Now, I want to focus a little bit more on the items that were mentioned in the track here. I blew this up a little bit larger. I didn't get it centered on the page, but MJ mentioned a couple things here. First off, the terminology is bogus here, because correct terminology, the species is not capitalized, which it is here. For Homo sapien, that's not correct. It's Homo sapiens with an S on the end. She alluded to the problem of Neanderthal man. Well, Neanderthal bones have about a 15% or 50% greater thickness than Cro-Magnon bones. Neanderthal skulls were about 15% larger in capacity. They were a different shape. So that business doesn't have anything to do with diseases. That's a different line of human beings, whether it was a species or a subspecies. It would probably be a matter that could be disputed, but definitely not a story about some Cro-Magnon people that were sick.